Thank you to everybody for coming out on such a dreary afternoon. We'll try and brighten it up a little bit with a conversation. I'm Joe Shaw. I'm the executive editor of the Express News Group. We've been doing, I believe this may be our 12th press and express session since our merger, which is a pretty fast pace. We've had a lot of luck tackling a lot of really important local issues, and this is a really interesting one, I think, and I'm looking forward to the conversation today. It is about the seasonal rental market. You know, it used to be that seasonal rentals were what drove the local economy, and they still exist, but they're no longer the standard. And year-round rentals have become increasingly rare. The short-term rentals are actually becoming far more common. And AirBNB and other online marketers have become increasingly important players in the local market. Last year, New York State adopted some new laws to protect tenants that could create unintended consequences for homeowners who rent their homes seasonally on the East End. That's yet another aspect of this that we want to talk about today. We want to talk about what all that means for the region. This is a region that depended heavily for a century on the summer rental, and this is no longer quite the case. So we'll jump into that and explore it. I want to tell you a little bit about the format. If you haven't seen one of these press sessions events, it's very much a conversation. We have a panel who I will introduce in a moment, but we really want the audience to be directly involved, asking questions, providing input, commentary. I would only ask for a couple of things. One is to try and keep your comments as brief as possible so that we can get as many people involved as we can. And the second thing is to speak directly into the microphone just like this. It's important for the crowd and for our friends at LTV. We want to make sure everybody can hear your comments. When we begin the conversation, I've already told the panel, they're allowed to ask questions. They're allowed to talk with each other and answer you. If you have a comment or a question, please just catch my eye. Virginia will also be in the back of the room for you folks. If you want to catch her eye, if you have any comments or questions to add to the conversation, we'll open it up to the floor right after we introduce our panel. We will try to wrap up by 2 o'clock sharp because we know everybody's on a busy schedule, so we'll keep to that. So with that, let me introduce our panelists. We'll start to my left with Judy Desiderio, who is the CEO and a real estate broker. That kind of just fluffed past the CEO part. She's a real estate broker who is CEO of Town and Country Real Estate. Judy, what trends have you seen in the rental market in recent years? And are the full season rentals becoming less sought after?
Excellent question. Yes. Before Barron Lehman fell, I would say was about the turning point of it. The rule was Memorial Day through Labor Day, and the exception was 1 month, July and August. And then that catastrophic economic event happened, and people pulled back on expenses. They pulled back on their luxury items, and having a house in the Hamptons for the summer is a luxury item. At the same time, the birth of these aggregates and them becoming more prevalent happened. So it was kind of like the perfect storm. And people looked to rent for a week or 2 weeks. And so there went the demise of the Memorial Day through Labor Day. And the rule then became 1 month, with Memorial Day through Labor Day becoming the exception to the rule.
Is it also true that there were a lot more sales? People who had been summer renters began to buy properties locally. Is that part of the trend as well?
That's always been the case. People come out, they enjoy the Hamptons, and then they decide, I want a little piece of this East End dirt. And that still applies. I mean, that's the plus side to the Airbnb, is that more people are being introduced to the East End, and they do fall in love, and some of them do become community-minded and part of the buyer population.
Okay, thanks, Judy. Our next panelist is a good friend of mine, Phil Keith. He is a Southampton Town Planning Board member. He is also a press columnist and an author. And he is a frequent Airbnb host, which is one of the reasons we have him on the panel. So, Phil, tell us about your experience as an Airbnb host. What do you see as the personal advantages of the Airbnb model for you?
When I found out that the Airbnb rep, unfortunately, has come down with the flu, I decided quickly to put on my Arrow shirt because I guess I'm the only one left who can speak a little bit about experience with Airbnb. Now, I'm in a unique position in that, as Joe mentioned, I'm on the planning board for the town of Southampton and an Airbnb host. As a member of the planning board, I get to see a lot of what is proposed for development within the town, of course. And we are certainly not at any time soon going to be approving any site plans for comfort suites or Holiday Inns or that sort of business. And that is all part of what we want to preserve in the community. But by the same token, as Judy said, there are a lot of people who want to come out and experience the Hamptons. And if you're not ready to plunk down a significant chunk of change for a long-term rental, a very good way to do that is to come out for a weekend or a week or some shorter period of time and enjoy the Hamptons. My partner, Laura, and I have been Airbnb hosts for, I don't even remember how many, 6 years? And I'm proud to say that we just got our 5-year Golden Key Superhost Award. Our experience has been phenomenal. We have had folks from literally all over the world. Our first guest was from South Africa. We've had people from Shanghai who insisted on cooking us authentic Chinese dinner in our own kitchen. We've had a lovely lady who has come 3 years in a row from Luxembourg and on. So from that standpoint, it's been a cultural experience, and we're not doing it certainly to get rich. We have one spare room, and that's what we offer to the Airbnb market. But it helps us leverage our resources, and the honest answer to why we do it is because we have learned that we love it. But you know what? It pays our taxes, our property taxes. So what's wrong with that?
Okay. Tom Rule is the Director of Housing for East Hampton Town. Tom, what's wrong with that? What do you see as the potential disadvantages and advantages of the Airbnb model? Let's get you a microphone.
Unfortunately, the Airbnb rep's not here due to the flu. And
Let me explain. We did have an invitation out for a representative from Airbnb. She did come down with the flu yesterday, and so I have a statement from her, which I will be reading after we introduce all the panelists. So go ahead, Tom. Sorry about that.
so I was prepared, very much so, for the representative from Airbnb. I did a little bit of research because I'm an expert at a lot of things, but Airbnb is not one of them. But the Economic Policy Institute did an analysis, and they said, what are the economic cost and benefit analysis for Airbnbs? And their summary conclusion, it's a very good report, by the way. It's available online. And the Economic Policy Institute is a bona fide think tank in Washington. Their analysis showed that the cost of an Airbnb expansion to renters and local jurisdictions likely exceeds the benefits to travelers and property owners. The benefit of Airbnb is it's lowering motel prices, which in a community which in at least Montauk is highly dependent on the motel industry, that industry is under stress. Now, the University of Waterloo, Canada, not the one where Napoleon ran into trouble, did a study and found out that 2% of Airbnb clients would not have gone to the place. They just went Airbnb because it was more attractive than a motel. So when Airbnb puts forth the argument that they're bringing all this economic activity, which admittedly in East Hampton might get them in more trouble, to a community, a lot of it's coming out of alternative businesses, such as motels, which traditionally rent. And the question is, there are houses being operated as de facto motels in residential districts. And I happen to live next to one of them, which also makes me uniquely qualified. And I will just read what the advertisement for that house online says. It says 10 guests, 6 bedrooms, 6 beds, 3 baths, $1,150 a night. You will have the house to yourself. And the host lives in Westport, Connecticut. So that's a de facto motel. It's operating in a residential district. It's not paying motel tax. Why that's relevant is the motel tax is used to promote the area. So it's in economics, it's called the free rider syndrome. I'm benefiting from the motel's advertising while competing against them and forcing their prices down. Some of the opposition in some places to Airbnbs have been by unions of hotel workers because, and the second, obviously, impact it's having is on the local real estate industry, which is also a vitally important part of the community because the rental industry has dramatically changed. It's also, there's a whole bunch of other factors there. If you use a neutral third party, Economic Policy Institute, and lastly, I have to say, and I don't want to take too much time, it adversely impacts, there's documented evidence, University of Southern California did a study, MIT and Harvard, that the presence of Airbnb raises the rents in the communities, thus making affordable housing even more difficult. And out here, there's a lot of anecdotal evidence that people are converting their houses from year-round rentals to Airbnbs because they can make more money doing that, and that is putting extreme pressure on the affordable housing market. And I just have to read one thing from the Economic Policy Institute. It says, property owners do benefit from Airbnb's capacity to lower transaction costs of operating short-term rentals, but the beneficiaries are disproportionately white and high-wealth households. So the Airbnb benefits property owners, particularly property owners with second homes or LLCs that are turning them into de facto motels, at the expense, again, of lower income households who simply, they can't even afford to rent here, let alone own and have an Airbnb. So that's the balance here. It doesn't say that some of these can't be rectified through regulation, but I will I was going to leave this for last, but South Lake Tahoe recently passed they basically banned short-term rentals in most of South Lake Tahoe by referendum. The voters went to the ballot on the issue of should we ban short-term rentals. It passed, albeit by 54 votes, but it passed, and except in the commercial area around the motel district, which they consider the tourist district, they banned short-term rentals because of many of the same issues we're having here. And with that,
We'll get back to it. We're going to keep that conversation going. And Christine Perucci Smith, who is a partner in the law firm Essex Hefter, Angel, D'Italia, and Pasca. I want to talk about the legalities of Airbnb, but let's change gears just real quickly to get it on the table as well, because it's also a big part of this conversation today. There's a new twist in the summer rentals on the South Fork, and it's the state legislation that was approved this last year. It prohibits landlords from collecting a full season's rent up front and makes it more difficult to evict non-paying tenants. These were rules that were put in place to protect tenants, aimed mainly at New York City and some other places. It really, admittedly, didn't take seasonal rentals into consideration. As we move towards the 2020 season, are you seeing the effects of this new legislation in landlords' willingness to rent seasonally?
That's a good question, Joe. Yes, we are, but I have to say that we're seeing a mixed response amongst our clients. And, first, as Judy mentioned, seasonal rentals aren't that, they've gone down over the last few years, and it's admittedly not a huge part of our practice. But I can say that we're having clients call us in droves and saying, we're getting out of the seasonal market completely. We're selling our homes, although we have had some clients indicate that to us. Many of our clients who have frequently rented their homes in the past, and particularly those who have rented to the same tenants year after year, a lot of them are coming to us and saying, you know what, we're just going to keep doing things the way we always have. And we're going to continue to collect the entire rent up front because economically it just doesn't make sense otherwise. We wouldn't be renting our home for the season if we didn't get the full amount of rent up front. So for those clients, we obviously have to caution them against doing that, of course, in light of what the laws say now. And we have to let them know that these laws go well beyond just what you can and cannot collect up front, but there are new requirements dealing with tenants' rights to inspections, and there's strict new rules dealing with the handling of the security deposit, and when that security deposit must be returned to the tenant. And general obligation law provides that there's a 14-day time period where the landlord has to return that security deposit, which starts once the tenant vacates the premises. And when they return the security deposit, they have to provide an itemized statement showing the basis for any deductions, of what they've withheld from the security. And if the landlord does not comply with these requirements, they can face forfeiting the entire deposit. And in some cases where the landlord is found to willfully non-comply, they could be subject to punitive damages under the statute of up to twice the amount of the deposit. So for clients who are just saying, we're going to, do things the way we always have, all right, you may be willing to take on those risks, but you have to know that there's more in these laws beyond just the collection of rent up front. I am seeing a difference in those landlords who are trying to get into the seasonal market for the first time. And I think a lot of that is also affected by whether they're working with a broker. Because brokers, as I'm sure you can attest to, Judy, they need to know the new laws and they need to comply, or they shouldn't be doing the seasonal leases at all. And we have heard of one brokerage firm in particular that's not doing them because the liability of getting involved is just too great for the brokers. But for those landlords who are working with the brokers, they're being guided by the brokers on how the leases have to be structured today. And they're going along with it, if you will. But then we have clients who are asking us, well, how else can we structure the leases? How do we get around and circumvent these new restrictions? And of course, we just don't have that magic solution right now. So there's, definitely still a willingness to engage, but for us, it's, are you willing to comply is a big question.
And just to clarify, I had a conversation with Assemblyman Fred Thiel. He has legislation pending in Albany now to address this that essentially would take these rules. And in talking with him, and we I believe just wrote an article in the press and the Express about this. He has said that it's a fairly simple statement that none of the legislators really foresaw this impact on the seasonal economy, and they want to fix it. His legislation would actually exempt leases of under 120 days, which probably would address the seasonal market out here and make the old rules come. But it isn't likely to take effect for the 2020 summer season, correct? I mean, it'll be at least
absolutely not
year.
From what I'm hearing, yeah. And there's other issues with the legislation. There's a lot of ambiguity in the law, so they may be tackling some of the other issues and presenting it as maybe another omnibus bill. So it may take some time for that carve out to actually come into effect.
Assuming it's approved. In
Correct.
Albany.
Correct.
Okay, and this is the moment where I'll tell you that Liz DeBold-Fusco was sadly unable to be with us, but I think we should all thank her for not bringing her virus from the city to the East End, because we have enough of them going around right now. So I really do appreciate her not being here in that regard. However, it's a disappointment because we were looking forward to talking with Liz, who is, she does public policy and communications for AirBNB in the region. She did send some observations that I thought I would share with you to help as we move forward in this conversation. She pointed out that the single home share has actually turned into a platform that's brought over 500 million guests into 7 million listings in nearly every country through Airbnb. In 2015, Airbnb actually released something that they called the Community Compact, and they say it's a commitment to work with governments to create new rules for short-term rentals and to help make sure that the communities are paying their fair share of taxes and also sharing data about the Airbnb community to help inform the policy making that comes. Her comment was, and I'm quoting, "Every single day we see how short-term rentals are creating economic opportunities for both the hosts who share their homes on our platform and for their communities, and helping municipalities to balance the dual needs to both protect this opportunity and craft common sense led regulations is key to preserving this important ecosystem. This is especially true on Long Island, where short-term rentals have proven to be vital to the local economy, the local tourism economy." She says that their numbers are that host communities earned about $58 million in supplemental income and welcomed 174,000 guests on Long Island. That's just Long Island. $58 million and 174,000 guests. And her point is that about 84% of Airbnb hosts say that they recommend restaurants and cafes to their guests. And so a lot of those dollars go back into the local economy where they're respent. And so the impact of Airbnb locally is positive. Airbnb has worked with a number of communities in New York, including Buffalo and Woodstock, to come up with reasonable regulatory approach. Those are her words. She said, quote, "Our priority is collaboration, not confrontation." They have some ideas. One of them is to use more short-term rental registries, to enforce bans on things like party houses, which they say they're not in favor of as well. They say essentially it's a starting point that any town that's considering regulations that would impact Airbnb, they hope that they'll work directly with Airbnb because they feel that there is room for regulation. Her final quote, which will be her last word on the subject, "The reality is that short-term rentals are here to stay on Long Island, and for good reason. The true task ahead of us is to find the right path forward. My suggestion to you all today is this: let's partner together, establishing clear rules of the road that your communities will be able to follow, generating significant revenue for your cities and towns, while also ensuring incoming tourists can continue to enjoy everything your communities have to offer." So with that, I want to open it up to the audience. But before I do, let me talk to my friend Phil. Phil, are you enjoying lunch? You had a nice lunch?
Yes, sir, I am.
Because I want you to earn it now.
All right.
Because I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit. So,
For you, I generally have to.
so you are a Southampton Town official. Southampton Town does not allow transient rentals, correct?
Can I plead the fifth?
What is the? I'm sure you're familiar.
Yeah, it's in transition right now, and I've had a number of discussions with Supervisor Schneiderman and Deputy Supervisor Frank Sapone and a couple of the council members. And the town's in kind of a no man's land as far as this is concerned right now, because if you want to properly follow the guidelines, you have to get a permit for anything less than a 2-week rental, and it's pretty complicated. It involves a fee. It doesn't really fit into the Airbnb scenario. But on the other hand, the town is actively working right now, and I think you're going to see something pretty soon, probably by this summer, which is a new effort to sort of bridge this divide. And it's going to be permission for short-term rentals like Airbnb, but you have to register. You're probably going to have to pay an annual fee, probably something in the range of $100. And you're probably going to have to submit to a health inspection. Now, wearing my two hats as both a host, along with my partner, and a town official, I'm okay with that. I really think we should have some sort of method whereby the town understands how many units are in this particular pipeline, and also have some minimal regulation, and certainly the health inspections. I think that's a great idea. And I believe that that's going to be coming within the next 2 to 3 months.
to be fair, I feel comfortable putting you on the spot. You've actually written about this before, and you've talked about, you made an interesting point, and this is a point that Liz has made in my conversations with her as well, that we talk about Airbnb's impact on affordable housing in that it takes up some of the oxygen by taking some of those rentals off of the market. But she has said, and I believe you have made the point as well, it works on the other side as well. It makes housing more affordable for the people who are becoming Airbnb hosts, that allows them to survive sort of the pressures that are pushing a lot of people out of the region.
Yeah, I think as I look at it, in the last time I took sort of an unofficial count, I believe that there are well over 1,000 Airbnb listings just for the town of Southampton now. And when you look at the economics of living here, and you look at the listings, if you truly go online and look at the listings, yes, you are going to find those houses that have, as Tom said, the 10 bedrooms that are available. And frankly, I'm not in favor of that. And as a town official, I would like to see us crack down on that, because that's really not the spirit of Airbnb. But you've got the vast majority of these listings are people who are renting out their spare bedrooms, or the loft over the garage that is suitable for occupancy, and they're helping pay their taxes. They're sending their kids to school. They're able to have a little bit more comfort. When you look at the average income, and I was hoping the Airbnb person would back me up on this, you're not talking about people who are making vast scads of money on this proposition. They're making their lives more comfortable. And as you said, Joe, that's the balance on the other side.
And Tom, can I ask you, East Hampton Town has addressed it a little more, they're a little ahead of the game from Southampton Town in addressing this issue. Do you grab a microphone, please?
Well, I think Airbnbs are a manifestation of something that's been going on in share houses. We still don't permit more than 4 unrelated people to live in a rental without the owner present. With the owner present, you can have as many unrelated people as you meet building code. And it permits 2 short-term rentals in a year. So you can have some, but not the continuing type of... You become, when that legislation was written, it was to prevent houses from becoming motels. Under share housing and other types of things that have been around since the 70s or 80s, this is just an alternative version of that in some ways. Now they can cut out the middleman or cut out the real estate agent, or do something a little more trustworthy than, say, Craigslist, because the downside is there are people, anecdotally now, but there's people abusing Airbnb by creating fake profiles on houses they don't own, and people show up and they're like, the owner of the house is like, who the hell is this? And so there have been issues with some of that stuff. But this is a manifestation of something the town's faced for a number of years. And I just want to go back to answering the person who's not here. The question that was asked of Airbnb by the University of Waterloo, which I alluded, was, thinking about your most recent Airbnb stay, if Airbnb and other similar person-to-person paid accommodation services, VRBO, did not exist, what type of accommodation would have been most likely used? Only 2% of the respondents said, I wouldn't have come but for Airbnb. Now, that's not to suggest that it doesn't benefit the person renting the room out, but for Airbnb to say, we bring all of these economic impacts and visitors. No, when they were surveyed, there people said, well, I would have stayed in a motel, or I would have stayed in a B&B, or I would have stayed in a hostel. Now, we don't have hostels, but so...
Be a flaw in that statistic that across the Airbnb universe, that's probably a fair number, but here... there aren't other options, and I have a feeling there will be a larger percentage of people who simply wouldn't come here without that as an option.
It's possible, but that creates 2 sides to the argument. The motel industry in Montauk has felt the impact of price competition, which is essentially what this is. Which, if you're a renter, if you're a tourist coming here, that's not bad. That's one of the economic benefits of Airbnb. They're lowering the price of rental units. If you're the motel operator in Montauk, that is a problem. I'm not saying there's a regulatory solution to like artificially high pricing. I think the market's Airbnb allows you to cut, under most circumstances, to get a room for a couple nights. A lot of motels used to have minimums. They would, their economic model has to change in response to this. I'm not suggesting that doesn't have to change, just like petroleum, saved the whales because we didn't have to burn whale oil. Now we burn petroleum, and now we figured out we have to do something about that. But I don't think it's their argument that they're bringing a lot of industries will argue the town will collapse if you regulate us overly. That argument is my data, of course, is done nationally. We've never analyzed every unit here. We haven't gotten that data and done that. I'm going on more of a generic look at how Airbnb works.
Fair enough. Let me ask you this. Phil describes an Airbnb experience that sounds very different to the Airbnb experience that you have next door to you. Can I ask you, has it been a negative experience for you living next door to a rental place that is not owner-occupied, it sounds like? It sounds like it's designed not to be owner-occupied, and that would be one of the big differences between what Phil and Laura are talking about. Have you had bad experiences, I guess, is what I'm asking.
There's two answers to that question. There are two houses next to each other. One's been a lot better. The one closest to me has been a lot better. The other unit, which I'm not saying that they're using Airbnb, but was renting similarly on a rotating basis, was a huge problem. Now, that got rectified. The host, who's next to my house, has gone out of his way to, inform his renters that we are a quiet neighborhood, residential neighborhood, and they deserve credit for that. I mean, and I don't want to characterize it in a horribly negative way. The other house I would characterize that way, but that was solved using alternative methods. I would just say that, I brought that example because A, I know it to be a certainty, and two, because Airbnb is very good at pretending that all their rentals, and I don't think it's true out here, are somebody renting a small room in their house helping to pay their taxes. That's the standard pitch. Everybody's in favor of that. We also have people investing in houses as business propositions because of those rules, and that is the battle the town's fighting against. And that's happened in the past as share houses. It's happened in the past as party houses. It's happened in the past with other things. So we have a bit of experience, and I have been quoted in the paper, and it's true. I surf Airbnb all the time to make sure our affordable housing people aren't renting out their houses, which they're not permitted to do. And other people the code enforcement people surf it all the time, trying to figure out people who don't have a rental registry permit and things like that. So there is that yin and yang. Not suggesting we ban them like Lake Tahoe did, but Lake Tahoe got to the point where they were like, So as the decisions inform down the road, I completely understand why Airbnb's position is we'd like to work with you to keep doing what we're doing. But from our point of view, we'd like to get rid of the problem children.
Fair enough. Go ahead.
This is where I say, with all due respect. Our experience with Airbnb in relation to problems or potential problems has been zero. I'm going to sound like I'm a spokesman, and I really am not. I hope you appreciate that. But over the 6 years we've been doing this, we have not had one problem from a renter or in any scenario. There was one that could have been a problem, but we got on the phone right away and identified the problem, and Airbnb took care of it. They called up the potential guest and said, you're not coming because you gave the host false information, and they're off the hook, and thank you very much, but we don't want your business, et cetera, et cetera. And I think they're very good at that. And for those of us who are on that other side of the spectrum, where we're not renting out 2, 3, 4, 5, or 10 rooms. They've proven to be very good. And customer relations, I mean, I would give them an A+.
Let me ask Judy to speak to this subject a little bit from the perspective of the real estate community. What's the general take on Airbnb and the impact on the local real estate community?
Well, I think if you ask any broker who's been in the business a really long time, they'll tell you it annihilated the rental business, and it certainly did. There are pluses and minuses to everything. As I said before, the plus is that some people are introduced to our area that would not have necessarily experienced it. The bad side is, and I'm surprised that my colleagues over here haven't mentioned this, the infrastructure of our hamlets are not designed for the number of people we have out here now. And that's largely due to people renting for a few days or 1 week. The roads are the roads. We're surrounded on 3 sides by water, and there's nowhere for people to go. At least out west, they could go further into the mountains. Here, you can't go further into the water. So we have a real problem with infrastructure. And the people we're seeing that come out with Airbnb, when they do rent for the week, they bring their cousins, their uncles, their brothers, their kids, their dogs, their cars, and everybody's got a car today from 17 years old up. So that really puts a major stress on the communities. And usually they bring a tray of lasagna and a couple of steaks and they throw them on the grill, and they don't necessarily come to the local community and have dinner out. They eat dinner in. I'm sure Cidarella's business went up, but not necessarily Mark's business here. Right, Mark? See? So I think if you really canvass the business community, you're going to find those pluses and minuses. And in my professional opinion, I think right now the minuses outweigh the pluses. But I'm hoping that East Hampton Town and Southampton Town and Southold Town, they can get together and really try and corral it a little bit better. We're told no less than 2-week rentals, and we're told no more than 4 people or 5 unrelated people, and yet everyone in this room can identify a house where there were plenty more than 4 or 5 people.
Okay, I'll come back to you, Christine. I have a question for you as well, but let's take a question from the audience. If you can introduce yourself.
Katie Casey. I'm with the East Hampton Housing Authority. Actually, my question is for Christine. The law that we've been referring to is the Housing Stability and Tenant Protections Act. That, because New York is common law, the legislature builds the bones and then the courts have to flesh it out. We don't know fully what the impact is going to be, but one unanticipated consequence I think we can pretty much count on is because of the expanded and extended notice requirements to remove somebody from the property, and if they haven't paid up front, if somebody represents that they want to rent the property for 2 weeks, it could easily take 4 to 6 months to get rid of them.
That's true. Although in the real property actions and proceedings law, it does define a tenant as occupying for 30 days. So I don't know if somebody, being in the premises for 2 weeks would be entitled to all those same protections with the eviction proceedings. But you're certainly correct in that all the notice requirements are certainly going to delay the process to evict a tenant. If they fail to pay rent, there's an automatic 5-day. If they fail to pay rent on time, the landlord has to send a notice by certified mail saying, hey, you're late. You got to give that notice first. Then the statutory notice that you have to give before you can commence a non-payment proceeding changed from 3 days to 14 days. So right there easily, you can argue that you're at 19 days because it's unclear whether you can send that first 5-day simultaneously with the 14-day notice. So the time periods have certainly been extended for tenants.
And to try and explain this a little better, the law is really written tenants who are renting year round, more like middle class, lower middle class people, it really didn't take into consideration shorter term rentals at a really high end, which have a different mechanism when it comes to things like security deposits and things, correct?
Yeah, that's entirely correct. I mean, I think the general consensus is when the state was passing these laws, they never intended to affect this market, and they were trying to protect the tenant whose, the majority of their income has to go to housing. And, they were trying to protect them from having to give several months up front, having their security deposit be held onto for an unreasonable length of time. So I think that was the targeted audience for sure.
Judy, you want to add?
The new law is going to be a nightmare out here. Let there be no mistakes. If there's anyone who's got even a little bit of a negative bend, you can take this new law and thoroughly abuse anybody on the East End if they follow the rules, because we are doing July through Labor Day rentals. So if that person takes it and gives you July up front, you can't get August until right before. You don't get your security deposit till you get right. You move in. You can't get a pet deposit anymore, and you can't get a utility deposit. So I guarantee you, as someone who's been in the business over 35 years, the reason we have the set of procedures that we have right now is simply because there was abuse to the system. People who chose to abuse the system decided, okay, there were leaves in the pool, so I'm not paying the pool guy. I didn't like the way the cleaning person cleaned, so I'm not going to pay the cleaning guy. And you know what? Now it rained so much, I don't think I'm going to stay here for August, although somebody stayed in the house. And so you get where I'm going with this. Landlords are going to get screwed, excuse the expression. So are the service providers out here. And the landlords are going to really, it's going to be catastrophic. Lawyers will do okay, though. No doubt about that. No doubt about that. But unfortunately, the way that it's written, and although the 120-day, what do they call it? It's nowhere, no one's even listening to that, because they've been trying to do that since the law came into effect. But if you look at everything, including something like a pet deposit, it was born from people needing an additional security when there's a pet in residence. The same with the utility deposit. That was born from the fact that some tenants didn't pay the people's service providers. So you were out if you own the house. And believe me, there's a lot of people who rent their house out because they're teachers or they're cops or they're whatever it might be, and this really helps them to stay in the area. The towns, excuse me, guys, have done nothing about allowing for mother-daughters, allowing for accessory structures. So this is how people augment their income, and this is going to be a nightmare.
Okay, Michael, you have introduce yourself, please.
Hi, Michael Daly from Sag Harbor. And from a couple of different perspectives, first of all, as a real estate agent, this new rental law has sent our entire rental business into chaos. And every attorney and every real estate brokerage legal department has a different opinion about what to do, and nobody is sharing the same opinion. In a Memorial Day to Labor Day lease that just got executed, I felt executed during the process, but it just got signed. We ended up with 4 different leases, one for May 15th to June 15th, another one June, July, August, and then August to Labor Day. 4 different leases having to be signed with schedules of 16 different checks being written over the course of the summer. This is one lease.
One renter.
One renter. And this client, 4 different leases for the same, one was for the husband, one was for the wife. I mean, because this is what the attorney for the landlord thought needed to be done. So now I'm going to lose this client because they said, Mike Daly, if this is what you put me in this situation, I don't want to do business anymore, It made me look like an idiot, but I didn't know how else to control it. So there's such chaos is what my point is. And this is a long-term client. So that's one case, yeah. There's no mono solution to how to deal with this most effectively right now. And it's going to impact. I know agents who are saying, you know what, I don't want to deal with rentals anymore, or I don't want to do it.
Yeah, and they're sending them to us, which okay, that's great, but we still don't have all the answers right now. And
Yeah.
you know, I have heard clients asking me and other attorneys also structuring short-term rentals in that way, you know, of having separate leases, separate deposits. But you know, if things go awry and you end up in court, what's the judge going to say? How is he going to look at that? And
Exactly.
there's other areas of the statutes. For instance, there's new notice requirements when a landlord does not want to renew a lease, which really makes no sense in the short-term rental context. But in that statute, the amount of notice that you have to give the tenant doesn't just depend on what the term of the lease is, but it depends on how long the tenant has occupied the premises collectively. So there's already language in the statutes that say, you know, you look at the total amount of time the tenant's been there. And I think it's plausible then to say that just because there's separate lease agreements, you know, this is one transaction for an extended period of term, and you've collected beyond what you should have collected. So
It's just chaos.
Yeah.
But can I make another point just
Although,
quickly?
because as brokers go, we are going to be on the hook. Even though we produce a lease that we're
Right.
not a party to as a courtesy, because when in Rome, you do as the Romans do, I guarantee you if there's one dispute between the landlord and the tenant, we're all going to get dragged into it. And there
Right.
will be, because now this opens up a myriad of different complaints, if you will, that one could lodge.
We're in a pickle.
I would
We're in
just
a
say,
pickle.
I would just say the other thing is that that logically transitions into someone making a rational economic decision of saying, screw it, I'm going to Airbnb because it's 2 weeks. Right.
Just real quickly, I want to say to Judy, what's the potential long-term impact on this? If it's a bad summer and there's all this chaos, is there a potential for a long-term impact?
What I'm listening to, and sometimes you just need to listen to all the noise that's out there. What I'm listening to is between the rental registration and between the rental permit and between the new lease agreements, we have landlords that have owned houses for, 30 years or more, and they're like up to their eyeballs with it. And they say, that's it. Get me out of this mess. I'm going to Florida where there's no taxes and I can do whatever I want to do. And so that's what I think is going to be the long-term wave.
Hi, Jane Holden. I'm a broker. I've worked with Judy for many years, 38 years, and I work with Brown Harris Stevens in Sag Harbor. So on a couple of things, first of all, the Sag Harbor hotels, the Sag Harbor Inn, all the ones there, they are all complaining about the money they're losing because of Airbnb. The merchants on Main Street, and we're right on Main Street, and I've walked that Main Street for many years. And so many of these people, they're walking up and down the street. They're buying the newspaper. They're going in stores with their ice cream cones, but they're not spending money. They're coming out, they're getting these short rentals. And as far as doing rentals, and I've always done a good business in rentals, they're a nightmare. And nothing is protecting the homeowner. And as Judy said, yes, we would collect a utility deposit, and that way all the utilities stay in the homeowner's name, and the service people, everybody is guaranteed to be paid. And we've always had it where the homeowner had 45 days to return the money, which allowed for the August bill to come in so that they could see what the electric bill was, how much fuel was used heating the pool, because pool, that's a nightmare when they start leaving them on 24/7. And 15 days, there is no way a homeowner can have the proper bills to make the deductions and mail them back. This law was done in New York State. There was absolutely no looking on both sides of the fence. It was just people out to make a political statement if they were helping tenants. And I work very hard to help young tenants get into places, and it's not easy to do. But they've just made our life a nightmare, and a lot of people out here are losing money, and as Judy said, they're going to sell their houses because they can't afford to stay here.
It could have a very big effect in the summer of 2020. We're going to find out. Right here, this one right here. Actually, Virginia, yeah, can we go over here first? Yes, there we go.
I feel like I maybe have sort of a solution, believe it or not. It's Janice Delano, and I'm a landlord, and I just lost a huge lease for exactly this reason, because it was a 2-month lease, and I backed out of it because they would not pay two months in advance. But I felt that if someone else came to me for 2 months, I would not follow the law. And the reason I think you can do that is there's this Part D. This is one little paragraph out of the legislation, but this is the preface to the legislation. Part D, this is part of the legislation. It says the legislature therefore declares that in order to prevent uncertainty, potential hardship, and dislocation of tenants living in housing accommodations subject to government regulations or to those not subject to government regulations, that would be someone like me, the provisions of this act are necessary to protect the public health, safety, and general welfare. Now, I think that's fact is being totally ignored, and I actually mentioned this to ask Christine. This is in the law. It's the beginning of the law, prefacing the law, and if somebody takes me to court when I violate the law, which I will, I intend to, I am so upset over this. I mean, it's my entire livelihood that I intend to go to court with my lawyer and point out this section of the law and say this does not apply to summer rentals for this reason. This is in the law. This is the preface to the law.
The justification for the law, I believe, right, is what you're saying. So, Christine, Tom, is this the danger that when the law becomes so onerous, people will just ignore it, and that will create a real crisis for the towns as well?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's going to be, every individual is going to make the decision whether they want to take on the risk and, outweigh the benefits versus the risks. And you're making a business decision to say, I'm still going to, do it the way I have, collect both months up front, and I'll duke it out in court when the time comes. Well, I just wanted to ask, I know that the statute, which is I think it's 174 pages long, and it is broken down in different parts A through M. Are you referring to Part D? Okay, because I'd have to look back at that. I know Part M deals with the statewide laws that I'm talking about, so I don't know offhand what Part D is speaking to.
That's the purpose of this law, Part D, and I think all the lawyers are ignoring this, because if you look at that, that's the purpose, I think you can go to court and say that you are not obligated to follow the law because this is not. I think you could say you're not obligated to follow the law because this is saying this is the purpose of the law, and it has nothing to do with people who are not needing to be protected. This is saying the purpose of the law is to protect people who are poor.
I think the focus was on the tenant protection, so unfortunately, I don't know. I'll look at it. But in the general obligation law, where it clearly says no deposit or advance shall exceed 1 month's rent. And I think that's some confusion too. Can you take a 1 month security deposit and can you take 1 month rent upon signing of the lease? And Judy, I'm just curious to ask you that. You're seeing that you can only, upon signing of the lease, take 1 month for either rent or security, or?
Only get the 1 month, the first month up front. That's what it says. You can't get the security deposit until the day they move in. Now, we're making that so that they have to have certified funds. Because what if that bounces on top of everything else? Add more insult to injury. I have a question for you, though, Christine.
Yeah.
Can, if a landlord chooses to go with their lawyer and draw up a lease, can there be an escrow agent that holds the remainder of the money and releases it in accordance with the law?
That's a good question. I'd have to. I don't know if my firm would want to put ourselves in that position. We would be.
That's what I hear from every attorney.
I mean, who would be the escrow agent? It would be us. Do we want to interject ourselves in that? I don't know. To be honest.
Nightmare.
Yeah.
And Jane, I'm gonna add to what you said about the 15 days and the 45 days. For the most part, I would say 75% of our leases end on Labor Day, henceforth Tumbleweed Tuesday, right? Okay, so if you have 15 days and there's 3 service providers to clean carpeting and sofas, how are those 3 companies going to service 10,000 renters? Can't happen. 15 days is impossible. So, I mean, I could write a book on how this law screws everybody, but right now we're just open for discussion.
We have a question here. Hi, I'm Dave Cece, and my wife and I own a house in East Hampton that we rent out on occasion in the summer season, and we're just about finished building a house in Bridgehampton that the entire purpose of it is to be a summer rental. My question is, maybe it's rhetorical, is that the distinction here really seems to be between your primary residence versus a secondary residence. And if they merely made that change to the law and applied this only to rentals that are primary residences and not secondary residences or vacation homes, that would be a very quick fix to all the problems that have come up. Because the people who come out here have a primary residence elsewhere, right?
Doesn't necessarily apply. And if you've been in the business long enough, you know you got screwed this way years ago. Okay, if somebody takes a year-round rental and they take it in May, and you're only allowed 1 month at a time, that guy, come August, says, I'm done here. They got a year-round rental for 3 or 4 months, when really, on a year-round rental, 75% of that year-round rental value is the summer. So the landlord just got screwed again. Sorry. And it has happened. And that's how we got to where we got to today.
Okay, here I have a question up front here, Virginia.
Hi, my name is Simon Harrison, and I've been in real estate for 32 years, and I've done thousands of rentals. I haven't fully digested the impact of these new laws. However, I have made a few notes. And if these laws and regulations, I mean, they're not guidelines, they're not negotiable, they're not malleable, it's going to drive a tremendous amount of business into court, and nobody wins in court, right? Nobody wins in court. The median income out here is $110,000. So in order to qualify for a year-round rental of $4,000 a month, you need to make $150,000 a year. So I've been saying that year-round rentals have been in a crisis situation for 5 years or more, and it's not going down. It's not getting better. With respect to Airbnb, I think it's great that we read some of their texts, but they're not here to defend some of the things that I'm about to say. Airbnb doesn't own real estate like Uber doesn't own taxis. And when one of you are in court as a tenant or a landlord or a real estate broker, Airbnb is gone. I know you've had some good experiences, but you haven't had any bad experiences. I think it's fair to say that their contracts don't provide them for helping you when things go bad. And you only need one bad rental in 20 years to turn you off from the real estate business, right? And turn you off from being a landlord. And I remember somebody 2 years ago, they said, we're going to do short-term rentals. We're not going to rent it this year. We got 50,000 last year, and then they got about 80,000 the next year doing short-term rentals. But it was very challenging, and it was hard work. And they said the last rental that they did, the neighbor called and said, "Is your son a lacrosse player?" And he said, "No." He says, "Well, the whole team is here, and they have tents, and they're on the beach." Now, they called and asked me and some of my friends for help to end that situation, and it worked out well. But not everybody has the ability to end a situation like that quietly and peacefully. And I cannot imagine that this new law is going to do anything except make it worse in the rental business as a landlord and as a tenant. So I think that this new legislation that's coming around has to be adjusted and amended, and not in such a way that it can be malleable and negotiable, and people are trying to figure out how to do end runs around it. Everybody's going to lose unless this is addressed in a significant way very fast.
Let me let Phil answer.
What I'm hearing is that we really have two different challenges, and I don't see any easy solutions, but I think it's incumbent upon at least the two towns that we seem to have mostly represented here, East Hampton and Southampton, to get together and work out a regulatory solution that is as amenable as it can be to all parties, at least so we're all on the same level playing field. It's not that you're never going to have problems. We've been lucky. I have certainly heard of people having problems. I will tell you that the contract between a host and Airbnb covers probably 90% of any situation anybody's going to get into in terms of having property destroyed or something damaged at the house. And Airbnb will represent you if you follow their rules and go along with their regulations. So I think that's a good thing. But the short-term rental market and the Airbnb market, I really feel after listening to all of you is two different situations. And I'd love to see the towns get together to work this out to everybody's benefit. I think that's the only way it's going to improve.
Sure, I'll give you a second. I want to ask Tom real quick. One thing we haven't really talked about yet is the Airbnb impact on affordable housing options for year-round residents and the complete disappearance of the year-round rental. Have you seen that? Is that something, I'm not just imagining that, correct?
No, I think they've both rents have been increased by the Airbnbs being able to get more rental money out of it in that shorter period of time and getting out of the year-round market. There are a lot of other factors driving that also. It's not just Airbnb. But there have been, I know anecdotally of people who have said they've been long-term tenants, and that the landlord said, well, you got to get out because I've decided to go Airbnb. And then also the other economic model, people buying houses or LLCs buying houses with the express purpose of renting them in some ways any way they can. Maybe Airbnb, maybe short-term rental, whatever I got. I got the chart of the months in the summer, and I do weddings and things like that. And if I get a hit on Airbnb, I'll rent it. If I get a hit on another rental, I'll rent it for 3 weeks. So I think there's investment money going into houses for the express purpose of renting them, and that is taking those houses off of market. Now, the house I alluded to earlier had actually been year-round housing for somebody who worked for the town. They sold it. They went south. It got torn down. It got turned into the six-bedroom house. That pulled it out of the market. Now, whether it would have rented it affordably, no, it sold for $550, which at this market it's at the lower end. Now I was listed at $119. I don't think it's worth that. The neighborhood's not nearly that good, but there is this. Every time you build a bigger house by bombing out a smaller house, you pull stuff out of the affordable market or the lower end of the market. And if you're doing that purely for investment purposes, it's like building a mini motel in some places. And just to answer another question, I think there is a difference between owner-occupied short-term rentals where you're the guest host and those where there's no landlord present on site. And those are the ones that are riskier based just on anecdotal experience, things that get out of control. Because as I was saying, we had two houses, and the other problem was another neighbor started calling the landlord every time there was a problem at home, and he's like, why are you calling me at 3 a.m? If I'm up at 3 a.m, you're up at 3 a.m. And that's how we calmed that house down, because that wasn't an owner-occupied situation. But generally, I think on an owner-occupied Airbnb, I think it's a little different than a absentee owner Airbnb or an absentee owner rental. I mean, we've had people who read the papers know that there's always those horror stories.
Okay, I actually have someone up here first. Can I get him in then?
So I'm just curious. Sorry, my name is Jean Zakowski, and We own 2 homes in Sag Harbor. We'll live in one while renting the other because they're quite different. And we've had success doing some long-term as well as some Airbnb. Did have one time when the weather forecast had changed for Memorial Day, and the guy said, I never signed up. My account was hacked. And, you know, it was a sizable amount. He was going to be there for 5 days. It took me until September to, after many, many emails and things. So it's a process, but if you don't stay on it, you won't get a cent. So just, I think HomeAway and Airbnb are pretty similar. Maybe they're not. I don't know. I use them both. But the thing that seems really interesting, if the towns were to say, let's go back to long-term rentals, then there's no option just this way Tahoe did it. But the legislation means you're going to have to be writing things illegal. So does the right hand understand what the left hand? Because if the towns were to say, we want to go back to at least a minimum of 30-day rental, right? Maybe that would be a fair and equitable solution, because then whoever the potential renters, they're going to come out for that term. But if they wanted to come out for a little longer, we're going to be doing things illegal. I don't want to do anything illegal. This would make me come out of the market.
This is a question that I had for Judy, which is, let's say that happened and the towns decided to try and push the market back towards a seasonal rental or longer term rentals. Is there even a market for that at this point? I mean, which way is it driven? If you take away those opportunities, are people going to adapt and decide, okay, well, instead of renting for a week or two, I will rent for 3 months again like I did in 2005? Is that going to happen, from your point of view? Do you think the market is even there?
I think there could be a market. I think people will get creative. One couple will have it for 2 weeks, another couple will have it for another 2 weeks, and they'll find their own workaround. But I have a question. I thought we had a minimum of 2-week rentals that were law. And what happens when somebody goes in for 3, 4, or 5 days? How does that work? Talking to you guys.
Part of my original question is that at least in Southampton Town, I believe the limit is 2 weeks for a rental.
That's currently correct.
And so, I mean, but the town clearly doesn't enforce that law very, very heavily. If there are 1,000 listings in Southampton Town on Airbnb,
It's literally impossible. Code enforcement is overwhelmed with lots of other issues, and that's why, as I mentioned earlier, we think it's important to get on top of this as soon as we can and find a solution that works for as many people as possible. But yeah, you're right. It currently is. You have to have a minimum of 2 weeks, and you have to get a permit.
we'll come back to you in a second, okay?
I can say with relative certainty that, and this, I'm taking a step back, sorry, but a significant number of housing units were taken out of affordable, modest homes, were taken out of play on a year-round basis because of HomeAway, Airbnb, Craigslist, all that, because any of the subsidy programs require a 12-month lease. The tenant has to have exclusive right to the premises for the full 12 months, and they cannot do a side deal with the landlord, like go camping at Hither Hills for 2 weeks, we'll make $1,000 and I'll split it with you. If they do that, they lose their subsidy. So that pulled a lot of housing units out of the affordable housing stock for the Housing Choice Voucher Program or, any just private property.
Let's allow a quick response here. Quick response, and then we'll go.
The quick response, a couple of problems we have here. The Hampton Classic is a 7-day rental. The Hampton movie theater, that's a short term. And we do them. We kind of choke on doing them, but they bring a lot of money into these communities. And so I know the town kind of turns their back on it, but, sometimes you have to do things to bring the money in, and that's a lot of money that comes in from the Hampton Classic and the movie.
The film festival and the
festival.
U.S. Open, the Southampton town
US
actually
Open.
formally
US Open.
lifted the restrictions for the U.S. Open, which is an
Yes.
acknowledgement that we don't have the capability
No.
to fill those.
It's very important.
Gentleman's been waiting patiently.
Hi, my name is Jesse Rosas, and I work here at Rowdy Hall. Hi, everybody. On the topic of community, I grew up out here. I am 25 years old. I am a minority, and I, have seen people come out here and grow out here. I don't really know much about renting. I don't really know much about buying housing, and that's because I'm not generally interested in doing so at the moment. And I think that's reflective on a lot of people my age, and especially like my age group in my year, millennials, what you want to say. And I think that's in part because there's not really a lot of affordable housing, affordable renting, or like anything available for a lot of people of us out here. So we tend to go to the city, or we move away, or we go somewhere else that there's more affordable income and housing. And I don't really have a question. It's more of like a discussion for this. Like a lot of people who I knew growing up, like my parents are also a part of the subject. We saw a lot of like ups and downs when it came to renting and also owning of housing, because their business thrives off of that as well. And nowadays they always tell me how they have like these interesting people who come in here who do rent, and they don't want to pay them sometimes, be that for whatever reason. That's up to them, But like I said, for my age, I don't think we want to buy anything or really rent anything out here, because it's not really in like a favorable position for us.
Intrusive, and you don't have to tell us anything more than you're comfortable saying. But what is your living situation? Do you have to commute from somewhere?
No, I do. Since I am still trying to go to school and everything out here, I do live with my parents still, and they recently be reasonable and they were able to make their own house out here. But that's after years and years of saving.
On a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being absolutely sure and 1 being not at all, what's your chances that you think at 30 you'll still be a resident of the South Fork?
I love it out here. I really do love it out here. It's a quiet, beautiful community. A lot of people do know each other out here, but because of that, it's not really progressive. I've lived in North Carolina, California. I've been to, we travel the world as we're young. So in my perspective, I would probably not be here, probably on the 7. By the age of 30, I would probably move out by then.
Okay. And that's obviously one part of the affordable housing equation, is another generation of folks. Let's go back to Michael. Obviously, affordable housing is, your organization is about affordable housing.
Yeah, taking the real estate hat off and putting the affordable housing advocacy. East End YIMBY, I think one of our biggest challenges is that we have all this anecdotal information and we don't have really any real statistics about our region. 2% of people wouldn't, and Tom, maybe you have statistics about East Hampton town, and maybe Southampton has some statistics, which the last I looked were 20 years old from Southampton town. There's no governing body for the 5 East End towns or the South Fork. So I've been researching it for years now, relevant statistics about housing, affordable housing, how many houses have been absorbed by AirBNB and VRBO that have been taken out of the pool. We have all the information we have is anecdotal. A lot of money comes in from those events, or there's no housing left for anybody, or all the young people are leaving. We need someone to do some real research about the number of houses we have, the number of people we have, the number of, and I don't know, maybe it's a great opportunity for the press news group to do something. Okay, I'm sorry. Maybe there needs to be some organization. Suffolk County is our only governing body that oversees us, and they're too busy about what's going on in Hapog to care about the East End.
Let me ask Tom. Why do you? I think that's a fair statement that we don't really have a lot of hard numbers on these topics. Why is that?
Well, we have hard numbers on the sense of the affordable housing crisis, and it was basically figured out by taking the year-round population, taking those people that are paying more than 30% of their income, are rent burdened under the definition that's used by the federal government. We took that number; it was so big, we said we went up to 40% of their income, just to get the number down lower. This is the famous number that people have been quoting forever about Koppelman. We need 2,000 units. We also took a certain number of the commuters, depending on whether you subscribe to the theory that Southampton's being overwhelmed by that large, massive traffic that comes east every day to work here. And we said, well, what if you assume that they own homes at the same rate west of here that the general population does, and then you take a certain percentage of those and you house those? It's a large number. It's 2,000. It's been called 2,000, and people say, well, you know, could it be 1,800? Could it be? Yes. I mean, it's like when they say something's 100 million years old. It's close enough. The crisis, you know, I mean, the people in East Hampton are leaving and going to Flanders, and then they're commuting back. You know, I've heard that described as everything from, well, if you can't afford to live in Manhattan, you can't afford to live in Manhattan. That's the way it is. To somebody's got to do something about the traffic. Well, and we need to come up with a transportation solution, not a housing solution. And we are in New York State, what is called a home rule state, which basically means the town of East Hampton controls the zoning in the town of East Hampton outside the village, Southampton onward and onward. I don't see any time in the near future that the towns are going to surrender those kinds of zoning powers to Suffolk County. And as people, if you'd like to have a long discussion of the history, Peconic County never went anywhere. Now there's all kinds of political reasons, and one of the obstacles is now was in prison. But who knows? I mean, it's a possibility to unify the 5 East End towns, which have a certain commonality. Efforts have been done on that with transportation, but it is still a home rule state. I mean, East Hampton wants to house its people here, live or work. Southampton, you know, it's the same. We're not interested in housing Shelter Island or Southampton or Riverhead's people in East Hampton. We feel like our obligation, and of course my salary is paid by the East Hampton taxpayers, is to house people who currently live or work in East Hampton. And we have all the stats in the world, but it's, you know, Katie Casey, who spoke before, is in the process of, and will be accepting applications if anyone really does need housing. You know, the Housing Authority is building a project in Amagansett. The waiting list for that project will give us a good idea how many people need rental housing. My 331 people for 12 units gives us an idea what we have for our condominium project. And people say, well, why don't you add up all the affordable housing waiting lists and I'll give you a number. Well, there's people on 5 lists, 10 lists. So that's a non-duplicate total. But and I always say this, the idea of fixating on an exact number when the crisis is so large is sort of like, you know, debating the problem is huge. It's gutting the middle class. Those of us that are lucky enough to have houses, it's a phenomenal place to live. Those that are looking to have a house and a rental house, like I do, are really sitting there great. The very low end will come here in overcrowded, substandard conditions and work in the menial jobs. And the middle class, which really all they want is a house or something of their own, they're leaving town. Some of them are leaving town to commute through Southampton to come back from Flanders and some other places. And some of them are just saying, going to South Carolina or North Carolina or Maine or places like that. And we know that's true, I think. I can't prove how many people move to Flanders, but
Katie was pointing out that a lot of the information that Michael was looking for will be found in the census.
They don't just count people. They look at income, whether you own or rent, median age, movement, transportation patterns. The census collects a lot of data. So in answer to your question, this is a good year for us to get real numbers that are fresh and then publish it and put it out there.
yeah, it's a pitch for everybody. Please fill out the census. and get anybody you know to fill out the census here. If you live here on April 1st, be here, live here. 1980, I got in a fight with them because I was in college, and I said, I don't live in college, I live at the eastern end of Long Island, and I filled my census out here. But it's important because the counting gives us the stats that we're going to work with. It also gives us the funding for some of the programs that we fund based on the need for that. Yes. No, I know, and it's unfortunate that there was that fight over, whether you're going to ask whether people are citizens. The census is designed to figure out what you're dealing with, but when people become terrified of their government, and in particular their federal government, but it trickles to all levels, they're not going to want to fill anything out. They're not going to, they won't even, and you can't do it for them. So you are absolutely correct. An undercount is a very real possibility in areas that have high immigrant populations, and quite frankly, we have high immigrant populations. And the last census demonstrated that when two of the three largest Hispanic block groups in Suffolk County are in East Hampton town.
Just so you understand, I want you to know that the town of Southampton is operating off a master plan dated 1997.
I think it was updated in 2001. Just to be fair, I think there was an update a couple of years later. Christine, I'm curious, the two issues that we've really focused on today, the Airbnb and on the new laws for the tenant protection laws. Laws are such blunt objects, and one of the things that unites those two topics seems to be that this area is unique, and the laws that apply in other places just don't apply here for a variety of reasons. Is that fair? And if that's true, how do you overcome that challenge?
I mean, yeah, it's fair because these were statewide rules, but obviously this region is unique. I don't know if I have the answer on how you overcome it.
Are there local, I mean, can it be solved at a local level in a way that the state legislation doesn't fix those problems?
Yeah, I think our representatives would have to speak to that.
You want to pick?
You'd need to ask Mr. Cuomo.
What's that?
Ask Mr. Cuomo if he cares.
Well, I think Fred Thiel's attempted on the real property law to try to bring something to the legislature. The short answer is that there's all kinds of striations of who can do what, but real property law basically is under the jurisdiction of New York State. The town couldn't pass its own version of real property law. And there are things we can regulate in terms of Airbnbs, but if Uber's a living proof of what happens when that happens, the town of East Hampton, in an effort to get a handle on the invasion wave of Ubers on certain weekends, started to regulate them, only to have the state basically take the regulatory authority completely away from the town and take it up to Albany. And if you go back to the 1770s, we were first the state of New York, then the states got together and created the United States. So the state of New York is really the central underlying power that be, and they give the towns whatever powers the towns have, based on a model going back to then.
So it's a difficult thing to try and tailor make these statewide laws for such a unique area. Fair enough. Okay, Dwayne. Maybe a last question here.
Hi, I'm Steve DiPolito. No one's really talked about. I understand the laws affect the realtors, but what about Airbnb? Like, they just ignore it? Like, if I just rent my house through Airbnb, am I going to be subjected to getting in trouble for renting it for 5 days, for 2 weeks, 2 months? So I'm like, there's a gray area there. Like, right now, I'm leaving a little confused. I came here not knowing how I'm going to rent out my property for the year, but I'm scared to death now and I'm thinking, I might as well just go with Airbnb because it seems like the Wild West with these guys. You can do whatever you want and they'll take responsibility. It won't take responsibility. I have a contract with them. Do the state laws apply to Airbnb, or they just kind of get a pass on that? Like, I'm a little confused on that.
Well, let me just say that again. I guess I got stuck with being the spokesperson today, but I can tell you absolutely that it's not consistent across the country because, as Tom said, every state has its own rules and regulations. Full disclosure, Brian Chesky, who was one of the 3 founders of Airbnb, was a student in my marketing class in college, and he's a very smart guy, and he is dedicated to working the solutions through the states and the townships, and they have a huge regulatory staff. And I'm sorry that the rep wasn't here today because I'm sure she could have explained that their goal is to come into an area and really try and comply with all the rules and regulations of the towns, the municipalities, and they work very hard at it. And they're now working with the county of Suffolk in terms of collecting hotel tax, which Airbnb hosts should be collecting, and they're not collecting because they don't know about it. And that's another issue. I mean, it's not much. It's like 3%, so it's not onerous. But I can assure you, and I can assure anyone who might think about being a host, at least with Airbnb, that they're working hard on this.
He's asking about a 2-month Airbnb. This is a Christine question. There are, I've wondered myself, many 2-month Airbnbs on Airbnb. How do they conform with these laws? That's what he's asking.
Well, it sounds like they don't. I don't have experience directly with Airbnb because it's not something clients bring to us, obviously. But, my thought was that most Airbnb are a weekend or a week long. But if you're telling me there's 2 month, if there's lots of them, I would think they have to comply with what the state laws require.
Judy, you want
You know what? Can I
Shed
say
some light
one thing
on-
on that?
It's also
Let me
not
let you
just
do that.
Airbnb, it's VRBO, it's HomeAway. There's a bunch of these aggregates that you can lease through. And for the most part, what we're finding is they don't follow any of the rules. Many of the homeowners don't have a rental registry number. They don't have a rental permit in Southampton. They don't care about what the laws are that we have to maintain. We kind of had this conversation earlier. It's kind of like Uber in the city. If you take a yellow cab, that guy's been vetted. He's licensed. He's insured. You jump into the car with the you don't know. So,
Tom, I'm going to let you finish it. You're going to get the last word.
Well, I'm going to say the short answer for that is landlord-tenant relations go real well until they hit the courts. And then the tenant and the landlord will use every legal option at their disposal, parsing the law to read whatever benefits them, and argue that in front of a judge. And the town, if it finds a violation on a particular property, is going to look up who the owner is, and that's where the violations are going first. Now, there have been cases where tenants have done things that landlords had no knowledge of, and there are ways to go through that. And I'm not in ordinance enforcement, but basically, the town pulls the tax roll, says who owns the property, and that's where the violation's going. And if it's a landlord-tenant dispute, I guarantee you both sides are going to drag out every single interpretation of that law. And sometimes, as you know, these things are going to get litigated further up the food chain because both sides are going to say it's clear as day, it says one thing. That's in this uncertain environment that has been created that the state may fix next year or may not. In this uncertain environment, the lawyers are going to make out great trying to figure out what the law actually says.
It's important to say that the press sessions and the express sessions, the goal is not to come together to fix things today. It's about bringing people together, having this conversation, and starting the conversation that leads to some solutions. I think we really did that today. I want to thank everybody who came out to help and participate. I hope you'll join me in thanking our panelists, who I think were terrific. And I want to thank Rowdy Hall, LTV, and our sponsors for helping us to do this. Thank you all very much, and we'll look forward to seeing you at the next event.